Hi, South by Southwest 2021. We're so excited that you've come to see our panel and are choosing to spend the next bit of time with us talking about secrets to inclusivity and how working with the messy middle can help your business. I'm really excited for these three lovely panelists to join us today. I know we've had some sessions together getting ready for this, and every time I talk with them all, I learn something new. And so I hope that today you will also learn something new that you can take back to your businesses, your companies, or use for your own personal growth. So to give you a little background about why we're all here and how we decided to get into this, is that a couple months back, Cassandra and the Ad Club were talking about, what does the future of work look like right now? We're in a period where it's unknown, it's uncharted, we don't know what people want. And we think sometimes, business leaders are not listening to the people that really matter, the people that are at their mid-level of their business, carrying their business. And so we sought out to do some qualitative research and talk to people across the mid-level of their careers, what we're calling the AKA messy middle. And don't worry if you've never heard the term before, because during this panel, you will leave knowing what that means and why it's important. And so we heard what they had to say. And then based on what they had to say, we've designed this panel so that we can answer and dig deeper into a little, some of the areas that were brought up and how we can bring solutions to that. So with that said, I am Danny Hemsley. I'm a director of qualitative research at Cassandra, which is a division of Engine. I'm also somebody who's navigating the messy middle myself. I will be your moderator today. And part of what's helped me in my navigation to the messy middle has been programs such as the Ad Club I'm Part Fellowship. So I'm part of the 2019 class of that. And I'm going to kick it over to our panelists who are going to each introduce themselves and say one word about what they think describes the messy middle. But before I do, I just want to say we're all wearing different hats today. And so part of that means that while we work at companies, some of us are part of the messy middle, and we're also individuals. So not everything that we say during this will represent the views or feelings of the companies that we currently work at. We are here in an individual capacity as well. So with that said, I will kick it over to Shamika. You want to kick us off?
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here with you today. My name is Shamika Brown. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a managing partner at the Adversity Group. I'm also CEO and certified coach at The Only One There. But prior to all of this, I spent 20 years in the advertising industry as a creative director and writer. And I am here because I'm often the only one there in a lot of the spaces that I find myself in. And now I'm pivoting that feeling of exclusion toward one of inclusion and using that as a way to bring people together and by way of neuroscience. So with that, I've had the pleasure of working with some of the emerging leaders from two cohorts from the I'm Part Fellowship with the Ad Club of New York.
Great, thanks so much, Shamika. Anita, you want to take it up?
Sure. Hello. So thank you so much for having me. I am absolutely thrilled to have participated in the Future of the Workplace study, and I'm honored to be here today. My name is Anita Shears. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a proud HBCU graduate and advocate. I am passionate about giving back to historically Black colleges and universities through working with the Spelman Alumni Association and, beyond, just to establish partnerships with different companies and organizations to promote the importance and impact of HBCUs on this country and the world. And in my spare time, I am the vice president for the Young Professionals Committee for the Advertising Club of New York. So working with an amazing group of young professionals at the early and mid stages of their career to, develop programming that we want to see in the advertising industry and, foster, professional development and networking opportunities. And the job that I actually get paid for is I am the senior manager of performance and content marketing at Marvel Entertainment. So thank you so much for having me again. And I'm excited to chat with my other esteemed panelists.
And I guess I'll jump in. Hola, mi gente. My name is Ash Ramirez. My pronouns are she and they. Specifically today, I wore my she and they earrings to represent the LGBTQ plus community. I'm also Latinx. Outside of that, I am a product of diversity programming, having gone through MAPE, Most Promising, as well as the Advertising Club of New York Women's Fellowship class. I'm super dedicated to diversity and inclusion work. And my day job, I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Digitas Health, which is part of the Publicis Group. And outside of that, I am the co-founder and programming director for Women Who Create, a mentorship program for women of color trying to break into creative industries. And I'm excited to be here.
Great. We're excited to have all of you, and thank you so much for joining today. Before we kick it into our questions, I know we're talking about the messy middle. I would love to just hear from each of you one word that you think describes the messy middle. Anita, would you go first?
Yeah, I would say the word is resilient.
I will say the word is opportunity.
I shifted my word. I will say the word is stretched.
Stretched. Interesting. When you say shifted, what did you shift it from?
So it was stressed. And I felt like that was a bit too negative because as a coach, I am encountering people at a crossroads and there's a lot going on. But I want to say stretched because they are capable and they just may not have the right resources at their fingertips to make what they need to happen.
Which actually brings us well into our next question. I think you've already started us off a bit and hope you can continue with this. But what does the messy middle really mean, and why should leaders even care about it?
Yeah, I'll go first. As a member of the messy middle, I would say that the messy middle quite literally describes, mid-level managers and employees who are at the middle stage of their careers. We are core members to any organization, but, similar to middle children, I would say sometimes we can feel overlooked when it comes to opportunities for professional development and overshadowed when it comes to priorities by, entry level or more senior executives. So there also isn't a clear playbook for how to advance and how to get out of the messy middle. So, it is a very interesting place to be, but I think it's important for leaders to focus on the messy middle and focus on how to enrich their experiences, because ultimately it will help them retain their mid-level talent.
And I'll even jump in and build on that. Speaking locally, I'm also part of the messy middle. And frankly, it's very uncomfortable navigating it because it's the unknown. But going back to my original word, it's also opportunity. And, there's a lot of trial by error. There's a lot of throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. But the discovery is the adventure, and that's what's exciting. Even though we're not as fresh as junior talent, leaders should still keep an eye on us as well, because we're the next generation of leaders and cultural shifters. We're honestly closer to it than junior talent. And so leaders should take care in fostering that bracket of talent should they want to keep them.
Yeah. To that, I'll add messy middle, typically overworked and under-resourced. And as a result, there's no formal training for them or probably even their managers. So it's a lot of learning by osmosis. And in our work within DEI and the coaching, we realize that middle section is where a lot of bad habits are formed. And so if you can course correct at that point, then you can probably save the individual and the organization from some of those ill effects.
Shamika, you touch on a really important point there where you talk about how, there's not enough training and development. And I think Ash, earlier, you talked about being the product of diversity programming, which to me sounds like training and development that maybe you've had to seek out on your own. And I'm curious to know a little bit more how you think that's helped you in this navigational period.
Yeah, I think it's given me tools to the unwritten rules. I think if anything, like I know going through and getting to the messy middle was hard enough, but then being in the messy middle is like, how do I be successful? So these diversity programs, like MAPE, like Most Promising, like the Ad Club Fellows, they give us that playbook that Anita was talking about earlier on, that those pieces of saying, this is how you can get to that next level.
Great. Thank you all. And so for our next question, it actually is inspired by the research we did. So from the Future of Work study, we had a participant who said, and I'm going to read her exact quote. She said, "I believe that companies are currently paying much more attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion than they ever were before. but I often wonder if it is too little, too late. So hearing this quote, I'm just wondering how that's resonating with you. What do you think about it? Do you agree, disagree? Why not?
Yeah, I would say I don't think it's ever too late to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think, you know, what is important is you have to introduce accountability into these conversations. So, you have to talk about it, but you also have to be about it. So you need to define, goals, timelines. What are your success metrics to be able to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization? Because without accountability, I think the conversations become performative. And we definitely saw that a lot in June over the summer. People posting Black tiles on their Instagram in support of Black lives, but now months later, where's the follow-up? So people are looking for that. And I think that's, really important so that we're not continuing to have the same conversations about it.
I would agree. It's never too late, but the issues are systemic in nature. So it's going to take a systemic solution to begin to fix it and undo it. And if you look at how long it took to get here, it's going to take a minute. So organizations need to move beyond the performative. They need to invest time and resources and do it with greater intention than they've currently been doing it.
And the other thing that I want to introduce is this notion of action bias. I think when we get to this point of saying, okay, people are leaving, we have to do something like, oh shit, let's do it, let's fix it, and let's fix it fast. This often happens, like, let me kind of take a step back and say like what action bias is, because I don't know if people know what that is, but it's a tendency to take action for reasons that are generally valid, but when it comes to a specific situation, we focus on the benefits of the action and ignore the costs. So when it comes to diversity and inclusion, how this is framed for leaders is they're predominantly white and they're uncomfortable with the realities of race and the racist systems that are still in place. So white fragility, right? It's present. Because they're uncomfortable, they're quick to take action, and they come out with this D&I strategy that maybe has like a pitfall there where they didn't take the time to ask underrepresented communities what they need. And in part of that too, did they really listen and did they believe them? So if they didn't, that's where that pitfall comes into play. And then whatever effort that you put forth to like try to fix the problem is null and void because you didn't take the time to listen.
Yeah. I think you bring up an important point, because I think it's important why we're doing panels like this is so that people have an opportunity to listen. I know as a white person myself, I've probably on multiple occasions been guilty of action bias without even thinking of it, and sometimes I want to help, but it's like reminding myself to take that step back. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that, along with the performative nature, leads us really well into our next question, which is following the racial justice protests over the summer and the growing awareness in our industry that something needed to be done to better support our Black and Brown colleagues, that, currently the current system wasn't supportive. People started doing things. And we saw in our research that some folks in our research, specifically Black women, were excited that their companies were suddenly taking an interest and that they had an opportunity to be visible and to have an opportunity to speak. However, we also saw on the flip side of that some were starting to recognize that, even though they had this opportunity, they were being asked multiple times, and it was starting to become a part of their job that wasn't the job they signed up for, and, felt a bit like unpaid labor and taking advantage of. So this is a two-part question, because I think, we have the businesses and what can businesses do here to do better, but then also, being all people of color yourselves, I would love for your advice to what to do if people find themselves in this situation and how they can navigate it as well.
Yeah, I can start. So to the employees doing this work, I want to first and foremost say, like, don't be afraid to establish boundaries. I think boundaries are an expression of your self-love and what you need to do to make sure you're okay. So it's okay to say no. And let me repeat that again, because it's okay to say no. Like, please take that with all the love and everything that I'm sending that way, because it's important for you to put yourself first. But I also want to talk to the businesses, because they need to recognize that this work is taxing. And for some people, it's traumatic to put out these experiences multiple times on a platform for the company's benefit. So if you're going to put someone through that ringer, why not pay them? Or have a dedicated resource to alleviate that burden. And, you know, it's again, it's about asking the question why. So like, what's the value that you're willing to put? What's the investment that you're willing to put for people of color, for underrepresented groups that's on this platform?
Yeah, to the companies, I would say now is not the time to put that burden on any of the Black and Brown employees within their agency or organization, especially during a pandemic that's disproportionately impacted these communities. There's a lot that's going on in the background that you may not realize, and let them just come to work. Let that be the job that they have to do. And let's start there and try to keep it there. I think to those who are within the organizations, to Ash's point, absolutely set some boundaries. It is a wonderful feeling until you feel like you're being used. So for you personally, you have to decide where that boundary is. And it might be to not do it at all. And that's okay as well. Coming out of the summer, especially after the murder of George Floyd, lists upon lists were developed where there are resources for DEI companies with founders of color, and they're all over the internet. So there is a resource that you can tap into, whether it's the company or the individual, and provide that to HR, provide that to those who are seeking this influence, and allow them to come in to do the work, or to Ash's point, create a dedicated resource internally for this to happen, because there will be a constant need for these conversations, and that is not a burden of the person who works there. And even difficult for practitioners within DEI, because it is a very heavy lift to sustain.
Yeah,
I would actually just, sorry, I would love to add to Shamika that list that you talk about, that for those listening in the audience, that Shamika owns a company that provides these services, and Ash and I can both attest to how wonderful Shamika's services are in really, you know, helping people, especially people in the mid-level of their career. So sorry, Anita, I didn't mean to.
I've been one of her sessions as well, and they are phenomenal. So I will sign on to that co-signing. But yeah, even thinking about this summer, you know, I think that this was a time, you know, I think it's very important for Black people to feel seen by their employer, by society as a whole. And, you know, everything that occurred over the summer allowed the opportunity for conversations where people felt like people are listening, like I am sharing my experience and people are listening. So I think that that is important for people to voice their experiences if they choose to do so. But I agree completely with Shamika and Ash that, you know, the responsibility for improving the experiences and the opportunities for, you know, Black and Brown employees requires, you know, full-time dedication, and it shouldn't be contingent upon work from your Black employees. You know, they have a job to do, so it's important to remember that. But I also think it's important to, you know, establish organizational policies that are going to support, you know, Black and Brown lives on a wider scale. So, you know, to do that, first you have to understand their experiences in the organization, their pain points, you know, what they want out of their career and from the organization, and what they need. And then from there, you can, you know, put programs in place to kind of help with those pain points. So like Ash and Shamika said, first being, you know, either hiring or outsourcing somebody to do that diversity work so that it isn't a burden. You know, when I talked about accountability, you know, providing diversity metrics in your company's performance goals, you know, putting that on paper and showing the world this is a priority for us and this isn't just a moment. And then I think it's also important to establish safe spaces for your employees. So whether that be an employee resource group or just opportunities where, you know, I can share my fellow experiences with other people and, you know, feel heard and have a moment. But, you know, those groups can also be, you know, great networking opportunities or create leadership opportunities where they can develop their own programming for themselves, but, you know, for the benefit of the company. So I think that there are ways, you know, to address it on an individual level so it's not a burden, but also think about, you know, how do you want to address it widely across your organization?
I think that's great. Just wondering, because you brought up in programs and listening to people to, you know, what type of programs do you want? So just going to throw out there, you know, if you could get a program at your company, what would you like to see?
I can say a program that exists. So Disney launched their like Disney on the Yard, and it's not an employee resource group, but it's just a group of, you know, people that have attended or support HBCUs. And it's a group for us to, you know, talk about our experiences, you know, understanding how to, you know, do recruitment efforts and, you know, showcasing, you know, the talent, the HBCU talent that exists, but then also how do you continue to bring that? So that was wonderful, just to be in a room, or a virtual room, because, you know, it's COVID, but to be around, you know, 400 other, you know, Black people from HBCUs. It was an amazing experience. And it was something that I didn't know that I needed, you know, but, you know, just being able to provide opportunities like that, I think is always nice.
Yeah, and that sounds like a wonderful point that Shamika had actually brought up earlier about moving from exclusion to inclusion, right? And the program you described, everything you say about it feels inclusive, right? Like when you describe it. So love that.
Yeah. Even though I work for myself, I will say coaching, I myself would benefit from a regular check-in with a coach. And I think that's something that everyone could really use as a resource, just to kind of step back and evaluate what's going on, you know, within their career, within their personal life, work, all of it is kind of meshed together right now. And so having some space where you can kind of disentangle these things would be helpful, I think, at any level and regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, what have you.
Yeah. It's a really good point. I know personally speaking at a company I was at before, when I had become a manager, there happened to be a program where I was able to work with a coach, and it was so helpful to, you know, being able to navigate situations where, you know, I have an employee who's maybe not performing up to their potential. And, you know, they were able to teach me things like, you know, make sure you're not going into the box when you go into that room with her. And then I think also, Shamika speaking, I've had the joy of working with you when I was transitioning into a new job. And, you know, that's a tough period when you're new at a company. What do you want your goals to be? What are you looking for? And having that outside perspective and somebody to just be objective is super helpful there. So would definitely add a cheer to the coaching. Great. Ash, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't know if I was like, can I plug? Because like for me, what really stands out is community-based programming, and like kind of touching on what Anita's saying, just like having a space where there's similar experiences, where you can feel like, okay, this person understands where I'm coming from. So that's why like I created Women Who Create, and I wanted to see more women of color in creative industries, and like to get them to that point of saying like, hey, like we're all going through this together. That's like, I need this not necessarily mentorship, but like I just need like somebody to talk to about XYZ. Just to know that I have somebody feels like so validating.
Yeah. And I think goes back to the theme of, you know, inclusion versus exclusion, that there's somebody in your corner who's got your back. Wonderful. So I'm going to go into our next question. So in our research, we heard that working from home can be a bit of a mixed bag. And I'm sure we hear this around the office too. Some people like it, some people don't like it, all sorts of opinions on this everywhere. One of the things that people did seem to appreciate was the balance that this was bringing to their lives. One of the downsides that we heard was that people feel like they're working in places that are less than ideal, especially thinking of if you're in your mid-career, you're not at that level where you're able to, you know, afford the higher rents for a bigger space, and you might be sharing a studio apartment with you know, your other half, or, you know, another less than ideal space. And we heard about that in our research. Wondering how can companies kind of work around creating safe spaces, both virtually and in person, and really, I think it's maintain empathy in the workplace. Like, what does this look like in this virtual environment?
I can jump in. I think it's a struggle to maintain that people connection when there's not a face-to-face connection. But, you know, we also have to understand that this work is no longer a bubble that we can escape to. We're at home, and what happens in the outside world is now impacting us more than ever. And so when things happen, just checking in on people on your company can make a world of difference. And I really want to specifically talk to managers, because this is it's especially important for them when you're overseeing somebody. Like, when you ask yourself, when you check in with your direct report, are you checking in on the status of the work, or are you actually checking in with the person? And if you're not, really start thinking about, how can I check in with that person? What are the questions I can ask to see how my direct report is really doing? And then whenever they talk to you and let you know what's going on. Don't be quick to take action. Don't fall into that action bias and try to be the savior and fix it all. Really just listen and validate. I think the validation is what people are really looking for. And then maybe as a follow-up, if you really do want to support, ask how I can support in this moment. What do you need? Or maybe even give them some time to like figure out like what they need, and then offer up for them to come back to you and ask for that support. So all of those things can culminate to a psychological safety first and foremost, where they can talk to you. And then that's where the empathy can get built in, and that's where those safe spaces can be established.
Yeah, I think this, the pandemic has been a bit cray-cray, to be honest, but I think it's also revealed a lack of management training. And I feel like at the beginning of the pandemic, the notion of cameras must be on was the new form of micromanagement. You know, how do I know you're working if I can't see you? And so with that though came some gaps in equity, because everyone doesn't want their coworkers in their living space. Everyone doesn't want to see, you know, and show where they live. And so having those strict mandates is inequitable, because everyone wouldn't necessarily opt into that. So if we're looking about leading with empathy, I think it is learning how to manage without micromanaging from a distance. And I think it's also taking a look at what is actually a requirement. How can you determine whether work is being done without having to see someone on the screen? And I feel like a lot of organizations have started to become a bit more lenient with that, and they've started to work their way through that. But I heard that a lot at the very beginning of the pandemic. So it's nice to see people evolving the way in which they're working.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also say, you know, just ask your employees what a safe space looks like, whether it's in person or virtually, through like conducting anonymous surveys, or even just allowing for forums for people to tell you, you know, what they need and what they're looking for, because, you know, people's needs are going to change over time. You know, what people needed at the beginning of the pandemic is very different than what they need now, almost a year later. So, you know, it's important to shift according to people's needs. But I would say, I think we can, you know, help to maintain empathy in the workplace by, you know, always recognizing and remembering that we're humans first and employees second. So, you know, nobody can come into work, aka log on to their computer and hide what's going on in their real life. You know, we're dealing with a global healthcare epidemic. You know, people have families, you know, they may have their own healthcare and medical issues that they're dealing with. So I think it's just important to give people grace and to understand, you know, that, you know, some people are not okay, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I want to touch on something that both you and Ash brought up, Anita. You just mentioned anonymous surveys, and Ash, you talked a lot about, you know, asking people, checking in, having those conversations. And this is totally an opinion question, but what is the preference and balance of when should it be an anonymous survey versus when should it be that personal connection of, let me ask you how you're doing and how you're feeling, but, you know, not wanting to put people on the spot?
Yeah, I'd say, like, I mean, if you really want to know what people think, there should be an anonymous factor, because I think sometimes the checking in to see if you're okay, that requires, I wouldn't, maybe like a relationship, like it requires more of a, you know, because if a senior leader is asking me like, are you okay? I'm going to say, yeah, I'm fine, you know? So, you know, if I'm a manager, maybe I would have a more candid conversation. But I think that, you know, if you really want to know, you know, I personally think the best way is to just ask anonymously so that people can feel safe being honest with their answers.
I would add on, just give people options. Like one way, like, you know how we have like text messaging, FaceTime, we have Instagram, we have all these things, but then, you know, like, let's think about it that way too. Like, if somebody doesn't want to give you direct feedback face to face, maybe it's an email, maybe it's a status, maybe it's text. Like, just if you can offer up that opportunity, that also increases like inclusivity and like this empathy to say, okay, you don't have to talk to me this direct way. Mm-hmm. It's the diversity of speaking and thought.
You know, and that actually reminds me, at my company right now at Engine, we have this thing called Standout, which is you write it to your manager, and it's like a couple questions every week, kind of like, how do I feel? This project made me feel strong, made me feel weak. These are my priorities, and this is what I need from you next week. And it's written. And at first there were people like, why do I need this written thing? Like people, you know, I have a meeting with my person every week. Like, why do I need this extra step? But what we would find out is that people sometimes feel more honest in that written, like, you know, like this is what I need. That's hard to necessarily articulate when you're looking at somebody. So definitely, yeah, appreciate that.
You know, particularly looking at the middle, you have to remember that voices are often silenced, or they're not quite as strong as they will eventually grow to be. And so to Ash's point, the more options, the better, because you never know where anyone is on that continuum of being confident and brave enough and mindful and all the things you need to be in order to kind of support yourself and kind of put yourself out there. So the more leeway, the better, because everybody's at a different point.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And I think, so one of the things kind of talking about this, Shamika, you brought up the cameras and the virtual nature and how this, you know, can create an issue. We actually heard from somebody in our research study that she's a Black woman and that she's experiencing less racial bias right now because she started at a company where there is no on video, everything is just a phone call. And she's convinced that her colleagues don't know she's Black and that, so she has none of it. So, and it's the first time in her professional career that she's able to experience that. On the flip side, I've also heard from people that, you know, there was somebody who they're short and on a video camera, you can't tell height, right? So right now, you know, if Ash and I stand next to each other in real life, there's a height difference, but on this camera, we don't know if I'm taller or if Ash is taller, right? It's just not clear, you know, but that's something that we can't tell. But we are eventually potentially going to go back to a model of whether it's hybrid in person or full-time in person. You know, there might be a requirement to show back up in workplaces. And just wondering, you know, how do we kind of help with making sure that some of the biases that we've maybe minimized during this time, the plus side of it, we can, you know, continue to minimize those biases when we're returning to an in-person environment?
I think you have to go to the gym now. You know, like if the goal is to run the marathon, you have to begin somewhere and you have to start now. So I think—
I thought you were telling me to go to the gym to get tall for a second.
No judgment zone. No judgment whatsoever. No, I just think you have to put in the work. You know, you have to start having those conversations. You have to start laying the foundation, because there have been some benefits to this time, people being able to adapt and work from home, but some of the underlying issues are still there. And if they are not managed now, they will be magnified when people return. So, you know, begin to create those safe virtual and in real life spaces, because they're going to be needed more than ever when we return, in my opinion.
I laugh because I'm actually really short in person. But, you know, I think for me, like building off Shamika's point, yes, like it's going to the gym, and it's also maintaining what you already are excelling at and making sure that like you don't lose that in the minutia of everything else. So if you are leading with empathy and you're having a great time with that, like stick with it and ensure, how do you make it better and reinvent it even more if it's doing good? Like, how do you make it better? So there's always not, it's not perfection, but it's always progress, if anything, when you work on these things.
Yeah, and I'd like to question, you know, are people experiencing less bias, or is it less interpersonal bias? Because I think now with our coworkers, because we're virtual, maybe your conversations with your coworkers are strictly professional. There's no water cooler gossip. There's no, you know, microaggressions. It's, you know, very transactional. So maybe your coworkers never see you, and sure, maybe they don't know she's Black, but, you know, bias exists in our society. It exists in organizations and systems and structures. So it's not going to go away just because we're virtual. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to, you know, like Shamika and Ash said, like stay in the gym. Like you got to stay shooting in the gym, and like make sure for companies, it's like, are you constantly auditing your hiring, your promotion, your retention, your termination rates? You know, for managers, you know, take a step back, look at your, you know, your teams. Do your white employee or do your employees of color have the same opportunities to fail as their white counterparts? Do they get the same amount of exposure to senior leaders, to stretch projects? Are they getting promoted at the same rate? Check out their salaries. Is there equity there? So I think that, there's definitely always work to do to combat bias, whether it's, virtually, in person, in structures. But, we really have to think about it, even though we're not face to face, it's like you have to have a holistic understanding of bias and how racism, interacts in our structures in order to be able to combat it and, hopefully eradicate it and eliminate it. So that's what I think.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought up performance and retention, because that actually links us into our next question really well. And one of the things we heard in our research is that, especially from women of color, that they've experienced racial bias during performance reviews in the past. However, there wasn't one person that said, I experienced racial bias and I don't want a performance review. Everybody still said, I want feedback. I want to know how I'm doing. I want direction and guidance on my career, and also an acknowledgement, what I'm doing well as where I can improve, what's going to help me get to that next step. And of course, in a non-biased way. So I'd like to ask the panel, how can companies really support the growth and development during this mid-level of career?
We always talk about, you need an individual development plan. And you don't have to wait until you land in the C-suite to get it. I think, there are a number of ways and resources that can introduce this at the mid-level, where it wouldn't necessarily, be such a hard financial investment or commitment or hit. And you might have to get creative, but a lot of us are in creative industries. So that shouldn't be part of the issue. You should be able to figure it out. Again, because these are the formative years. So whatever you can do to provide the support now to the messy middle, to kind of get those good habits in place, to get the good management skills and understanding in place, to have empathy as a piece of leadership and not necessarily seen as a sign of weakness per se, but kind of rewrite the rules at this level. I think that would change everything.
Can you just explain a bit more about what an individual development plan means? And I think you called it an IDP. And I'll be honest, the first time I heard it was the other day when you and Ash were talking about it. And I said, oh, that sounds like a great idea. But what does that look like for anybody in the panel, in our audience, that might not be aware?
Ash, I turn it to you.
Oh, man. So basically, an individual plan is someone sits down with you, predominantly from HR or a manager, maybe even both of them, and they sit with you and say, what do you need to get to the next level? Or maybe even further, what do you want? And so based on that conversation, there's a plan that gets developed between the manager and HR to say, okay, this is what we need to do to get you to your goals, and this is how we'll do it, and this is the time that it will take. And for it to be meaningful, like Shamika says, it should be individual, it should be personalized. But to that notion too, I want to build, it should be consistent across the board for everybody that's in the messy middle. And that's where the inclusivity comes into play too. So what you do for your BIPOC community, you should be doing for your white non-diverse folks too, just to ensure that, it's not siloed, to ensure that, you're not doing like this notion of like a handout, or like, oh, like we have to, just help the BIPOC community because they're disadvantaged and we just have to do that. Like, it's like, no, like we need to make sure that there's inclusivity at all points of the conversation. And when we build this together, everybody in the organization can have that opportunity and that equal access. And that's where we're trying to get at.
Anita, is there anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, I didn't know about that. So I learned something today. But, honestly, I think about it on the flip side, like as a member of the messy middle. And when I think about my career, something that has always stuck with me, and I'm sure I heard it at a panel from somebody else, but, it's the understanding that no one is going to care more about your career than you do. So you can't just place your career in your company's hands and be like, I hope it's successful. Like, you have to take charge of your own career and your own development. And, you know, sometimes that means finding development opportunities outside of your organization. You know, Ash mentioned all of the programs that she benefited from, and, you know, they weren't in her company, and that's okay. You know, it's okay for companies to say, we don't have the resources for this, but, you know, we want to recommend you for this fellowship program, or we, you know, it's okay for you to join this, you know, organization. So I think that, you know, that helps. And I also think it makes employees more well-rounded. You know, you want to develop in your job, but you also want to develop externally, because, you know, it'll benefit your career both ways.
Yeah. And I think too, speaking from personal experience, when somebody puts you up for those programs and opportunities, it shows that they definitely care about your personal development, because very often it means, as a company, you know, I might lose my employee for, you know, a couple of days because they're going to be out, you know, at a conference or at this program, but they're going to come back stronger. And I'm willing to, you know, let them not do their day job for a few days, because, you know, I recognize that this pays off in the long term. And definitely, I know when I was chosen for a program, I stayed at that company, you know, 5 years past that, because it was like, I felt like this company cares about me. And definitely, yeah, love the programs. So talking about programs, so all of you are, you know, involved with or run great programs, and especially work a lot with women of color who are navigating the messy middle right now. And I'm just wondering, what other issues might you be hearing, you know, from people that we haven't covered that, you know, companies should be aware of?
Like, where do I start?
Would you like?
You know, my action bias here. I want us to solve Rome in a day.
You know, it comes down to training. You know, a lot of people that I work with and that we take through leadership development, their managers aren't really good at their job. And so, you know, they've been able in the past to kind of make their way through it because, oh, I could stop by the desk and, you know, chat you up. And we're sitting next to each other in the meeting. And so in this space where, you know, you can't lean on those things, I think it's become a bit more apparent that the people who are in charge of their trajectory are not necessarily more informed about how they should get there than they are. And so, you know, the messy middle gets stuck and they feel kind of trapped because they now have the skill set and the understanding to do the job. They don't have the runway given to them to do it because their manager is kind of either unsure of how to help them get there or is a bit intimidated because if they did the job, then maybe they might be better at the job than their boss. And so what are you to do in that space? And so a lot of people are struggling around trying to figure out how to spread their wings because they're tasked with very menial tasks, not menial, but kind of below their level of competence. And so without being given the opportunity to fly, they're stuck on the ground. And so it feels like many of them are leaving. And crazy enough, people are finding work in the pandemic. And so there's opportunities out there. And I think people are not afraid to move forward and to go into those spaces because what's the alternative? You know?
Yeah, that is very true. I would also say, you know, companies should be aware of how this pandemic is disproportionately affecting the employment rate of women and specifically women of color in this country. And, you know, just how people are either involuntarily or I wouldn't even say voluntarily leaving. Maybe they have to leave because, you know, their home situation doesn't allow them to because they have children that are working remotely and from home and then their attention is required elsewhere. So I think that's important to watch and to keep track of. And then I would say, you know, companies should embrace, you know, employees' desire to shift careers within their organization. So I have a bunch of, you know, people that are messy middlers with me that, you know, have stayed at their same company, but shifted from, you know, creative to strategy or, you know, just shifted to D&I roles that weren't in them before. So I think it's important to invest in your employees and invest in, you know, them wanting to maybe do a career shift, but wanting to stay with the organization.
I love that, and I also had thought about that too, to be like any unconventional or non-traditional talent should be considered for the messy middle or for any type of role. The other thing that I did want to talk about was having more candid conversations and normalizing the dialogue around pay and around compensation and like what that looks like for people, because pay is important. Like we need it to live and we need it to move about this world. And like for many people, like there's this conversation right now. It's like, well, how much am I really getting paid, you know, with my male counterpart, or, you know, like, and so normalizing that conversation and saying like, hey, like if it's indeed like an equitable, you know, system, this is the band and this is where you fall and this is how you get to the next level. So like I just so that we can stop having these issues about like, oh, we can't talk about money, like we need to start normalizing that.
Yeah, I think that's really great. So would you suggest like a band for companies to put out there for each level or something, or, you know, to create some of that transparency?
Yes, definitely having more opportunities to educate people on like how compensation works and like how that ultimately gets determined for your band says the world too. Like once people have that education, they can understand, okay, this is where I fall. You could even like in your offer letter or like a promotion letter saying, hey, congratulations, you have a promotion, this is where you fall in the band, and this is what your pay is. And just to say like that way people know, like, and it's not this secret anymore. So the more transparency, the better.
Yeah. Definitely love that. Talking about pay transparency and worth and value and all of this, I'm curious to know, and this is specifically for Anita and Ash, because both of you have switched careers during the pandemic. And you're both extraordinary future leaders. You know, you're in the messy middle now, but I know one day I'm going to be working for
We'll make it out.
Yeah. When you're all in the C-suite, you know, remember your girl, come hire me. But seriously, I would love to know from you, like when it came to career switching, like what were some of the things that you were looking for, and when, you know, how did companies kind of entice you to join their team?
Yeah, for me, I'm a big believer in manifestation. And going back to my original word, I wanted opportunity. I wanted opportunity to lead. I wanted opportunity to make impact. And I wanted the opportunity to also just like connect more with people and to build these diversity strategies, this transformational change for people at Digitas Health. So I manifested that and it happened, and I'm just like, wow. But you know, I think what really, for me, what made the difference was the fact that people are open to wanting to do this work. And, you know, as long as someone can come to me and say, I'm here, I'm ready, like, let's go. I want to take this walk with you. Like, I can work with you. And so that's what I think really sealed the deal for me. And because every place, when it comes to diversity and inclusion efforts, no one's perfect right now. Everybody has some of the same problems, honestly. And we all have to work together and share those secrets too. And that's the other thing too. I feel like diversity work is very collaborative. It's very much sharing of secrets. It's trying to get everybody to be in a more equitable place. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. For me, I think, you know, when the pandemic hit, I was very much focused on keeping my job. I wanted to stay employed and prove value to my company, just because, you know, there was just so much going on in terms of the industry and the workforce. So I was like, I just want a job, you know, I want to keep where I'm at. But then, you know, around June, my kind of internal like clock hit where it was like, okay, Anita, like you've been focused on your growth and development. Like, what is your next stage? What is your next move? And I had always wanted to shift into entertainment. And I had always, you know, like similar to Ash, it's like, you want to learn, you want to grow. And you want to always join organizations where you feel like you can do that and you can feel like you're challenged. You know, nobody wants to work, or I don't want to work a job where I'm bored every day. Like, I want a new challenge every day. I want to learn something new, and I want to learn from amazing leaders. And, you know, so I think that was really important for me. And it was also important for me to like bet on myself, you know, believe in myself. I think sometimes, especially people in the messy middle, women of color, sometimes you deal with imposter syndrome. Like, should I be here? Am I good enough? And it's like, I had to really do some, you know, self-evaluation, say, nope, you're good enough. You can do this, you know, chase your dreams, get there. So, you know, it was a pandemic that pushed me to do it. But I think, you know, looking back on the past few months, it's been one of the best decisions I made, and my career is shifting during a pandemic.
Awesome. So that concludes all the questions that I formally have, but I would love to just, open it up if there's anything, last thoughts or things that anybody wants to add.
I want to build on that imposter syndrome because I literally had like a breakdown today in realness of tea. I think just a quick story, like for me, when I got this job, I did it just to say, I wanted to test myself to see if I was able to do it. And then I got the job offer and I was like, oh shit, now what do I do? But every day I feel like, thinking about where I'm at on the imposter syndrome spectrum, it's just like, you have to break out of that box, especially for women of color. We constantly get told every day that we're not good enough or we can't do the job. So, and it's conditioned in our brain. And so I have to do the work to like break that down, and it's taxing, and it's taking, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, but I am making progress. And so for anybody that is feeling that imposter syndrome, know that you're not alone. Know that it happens even when you're a junior level, missing middle, or executive and above. Like, it happens for everybody, and it's a real thing, but we can all get through it together.
Yeah. I mean, I will be very honest. I've felt it even moderating this panel. I think here I am talking to 3 amazing people, and like, as a moderator, having that imposter syndrome, I don't know as much as you all bring to the table around this topic. I'm learning, and yeah, but I said, got to show up, and part of this is the progress, to your point, Ash, progress, not perfection, right? We have to kind of get in and get there. So we could, as Shamika put it, we could fly, right? And
all about setting that intention, so whether it is to make it through the day or whether it is to soar, I think we all have the power to manifest our dreams and, figure out how to get out of the middle and make it to the top.
I love that.
And I would say some advice I would give to my fellow messy middle people is advice that my dad has given me, which is, anytime you're in a situation at work where you don't feel valued, or there was a situation that you didn't agree with that just didn't make you feel good, always remember that feeling and hold on to it. Because one day when you're in a position of power, you need to make sure that you never make anybody else feel the way that you might have felt in that situation. And I think that's, leads to like empathy and all of those things. It's important to remember how we feel right now and like trying to navigate this and, try to be there for somebody else when you are in a position of power.
To that, I would add, don't be afraid to ask for help. As women of color, that's not what we're inclined to do. And we take on so much more than we need to, but not already realizing our arms are full. So know that, it may not seem like there's help there, but whether it is within your organization, within your friend circle, within your family, do reach out for some level of support. And maybe it could come, officially and formally by way of a coach, or maybe it's you just catching up with your best friend because you just need to get this off your chest. But support can come in all forms. So by all means, seek it out.
I love that, supporting each other. And yeah, thank you all for taking the time out. Thank you to the audience for being here today, for taking the time to listen. I'm going to leave you with 3 things that stuck out to me personally during this panel, and that is safe spaces, exclusion to inclusion, and progress, not perfection. So this is a journey that we're all on, and together it can definitely take us to brighter places. So thank you so much. And with that, thank you, South by Southwest 2021. Woo!
Yeah.
Thank you.